In this webinar, I'll provide an overview of SOC system descriptions and talk about what should be included for SOC 1 and SOC 2 reports. Before we get started, let me introduce myself. My name is Richard Beard. I'm a manager with LBMC Information Security. I work in our IT assurance practice and primarily serve in our SOC service line. So what is a system description? The system description is included in Section 3 of a service organization's SOC report and helps the readers, that is, your customers, clients, or auditors, understand your systems, processes, data flow, and most importantly, the controls that are in place to manage risks to the achievement of service, commitments, and system requirements. The responsibility for developing and maintaining the system description lies with the service organization. The service auditor may give guidance and feedback, but as the service organization's management is ultimately responsible for developing, implementing, and operating the service organization system, they are also responsible for defining it within the report. Also, the system description will need to be maintained and updated for each reporting period to cover any changes in systems or processes. The more complete and accurate your system description, the better the readers will understand the systems, processes, data flows, and controls you have in place to manage risks. The AICPA is the authority for SOC reporting. They provide the description criteria that service organizations use to develop their SOC 2 system descriptions and that service auditors use to evaluate them. The AICPA publishes these criteria in a document available on their website called DC Section 200. It was developed in 2018 and updated in 2022. It should be noted that this applies to SOC 2 reports. We will cover SOC 1 system descriptions a little later. So first, we'll talk about SOC 2 system descriptions. System descriptions should be at a sufficient level of detail to provide a good understanding of internal controls without giving too much information so that security may be compromised. It should also be presented in a manner that does not omit or distort any information. Within the DC Section 200 document are the specific criteria for what should be in a SOC 2 system description. Here's a high-level view of those components. Included are the types of services provided and the principal service commitments and system requirements. The components of the system are listed, including infrastructure, software, people, procedures, and data. While there's no required format for the system description, there is required content, which we will define at a high level here. Two common ways we see a system description organized is by components of the system, or alternatively, components of internal control. Also included are a description of any system incidents that occurred during the audit period, the applicable trust services criteria, complementary user entity controls, controls at subservice organizations, any criteria that are not applicable, and any significant changes in the system since the previous review period. So I will go into each of these and describe what should be included in each section. Types of services provided. This one is pretty straightforward. Here, a service organization can draw on some of its existing documentation for describing the services it provides to the broad range of report users, not each individual one, and this should be contained to information relevant to the scope of the examination. Principal service commitments are only those that an organization makes to the majority of its clients. An organization will most likely have these defined in contracts, terms and conditions, and service level agreements. Some examples may be standards used for encryption of client data, compliance with standards, customer support commitments, and security and availability commitments. Principal system requirements are also those likely to be relevant to most user entities. An organization should already have these defined within system documentation and policies and procedures. System requirements are defined as to how the system should function in order to meet the service organization's commitments to user entities, meet commitments to vendors and business partners, and comply with laws and regulations. Under components of the system, we have 5 categories that will help define the system that is the focus of the examination and the boundaries of the system. Infrastructure. Here, the organization will disclose information about physical or virtual components of the system infrastructure, such as physical or virtual servers, network devices, storage, mobile devices, and remote access systems. The next component is software. Here, the organization will disclose software components used to support the system, including application programs, system software, databases, and web applications, as well as the nature of any in-house applications. In the people component, the organization will disclose information about roles and departments involved in management, operations, security, and governance. Procedures include information about the procedures through which the services are provided. This would include procedures relating to how the services are initiated, authorized, performed, and delivered. Procedures are usually developed based on policies. The data component will include information about the types of data used by the system, including files, databases, and output used or processed. It may also include how data is classified and disposed of when no longer needed. This is generally focused on customer data passing through or residing in the system, as well as other supporting data. If sensitive data is stored or processed by the system, additional information could be listed about how the organization secures this information. It should be noted that an organization should provide enough information to inform the reader, but be careful not to disclose information that could be exploited by a hostile party. Certain system incidents that occurred during the reporting period need to be disclosed, but it may be difficult to determine which ones need to be included. Here are the criteria listed by the AICPA. An incident should be disclosed if the incident was the result of controls not being suitably designed, if the incident was the result of controls not operating effectively, and if the incident was the result of a significant failure in the achievement of one or more of the service commitments or system requirements. If incidents are disclosed, then there are certain things that need to be included in the disclosure. They are the nature of the incident, the timing of the incident, and the extent of the incident and its disposition. An example might be that on a certain date and time, an employee clicked on a phishing email. The workstation was infected, as well as two other unpatched servers. The spread was contained to these three machines. An outside security firm was engaged to assess the incident. It was determined that no EPHI was compromised, and the three machines were re-imaged and restored from backup. A full assessment report was provided by the security firm, and as a result, servers were patched and it was ensured that future patching would occur. The employee received additional training, and the entire phishing training program was updated. It should be noted that disclosures of incidents should not be at such a detailed level so that a hostile party could exploit this information. If no incidents occurred, then that should be stated under this heading. The applicable SOC 2 Trust Services criteria may be the lengthiest section of the system description since it covers the criteria and the controls. This should not be just a listing of the controls, but a narrative that includes the controls. For example, if the report includes confidentiality, then information about common criteria controls as well as confidentiality controls would be included in this section. Now please be aware that the system description should not contain a description of a control that is not defined in the control matrix and tested by the service auditor. If it looks and smells like a control in the system description, there should be a control for it. And if there is a control in the control matrix, it should be described in the system description. Complementary user entity controls, or CUECs, are controls that the service organization assumes will be in place at the user entity. These controls, together with the service organization's controls, achieve the service commitments and system requirements. These are typically listed in table format, showing the related criteria and a brief description of the user entity control required. An example of this is the user entity appropriately authorizes access to the system and removes access when no longer needed. Complementary subservice organization controls. The service organization may use a subservice organization to carry out controls that, along with its own controls, accomplish its service commitments and system requirements. If so, this could be reported using the inclusive method or the carve-out method. If the inclusive method is used, then this section would describe the nature of the service provided, the specific controls implemented, any relevant aspects of the subservice organization's infrastructure, software, people, procedures, and data, as well as portions of the system attributable to the subservice organization. If the carve-out method is used, this section would include the nature of the service provided by the subservice organization, each of the trust services criteria to be met by the subservice organization, and the types of controls that the service organization assumes are implemented by the subservice organization. A common example of one of these is where the subservice organization is a cloud provider and one of the complementary subservice organization controls defines physical security controls. If there are trust services criteria that are not relevant to the system, then that is disclosed here. For example, if trust services criteria for privacy is in scope, but the service organization does not collect PHI, it may not be relevant. If so, then controls for this trust services criteria would not be included, and the reason for the omission would be disclosed here. It should be noted that just because components of the system are outsourced to a subservice organization, this does not necessarily mean that related criteria are not relevant. The service organization is responsible for relevant criteria, whether the controls are at the service organization or at the subservice organization. Significant changes to the system would include descriptions of changes that are likely to be relevant to a broad range of report users and should include the date the changes occurred, as well as how the system differed before and after the change. This is not an exhaustive list, but some examples are changes to the services provided, significant changes to IT or security personnel, and changes to IT architectures or processes, including those at subservice organizations. If there were no significant changes, then that should be stated in this section. Part of the recent AICPA update included a newly updated sample report and sample system description. These are available to members on the AICPA website. Search for Illustrative SOC 2 Report. Now we'll take a look at what should be included in SOC 1 system descriptions. The SOC 1 system description is intended to provide user auditors and user entities with information about the service organization's system that may be relevant to the user entity's internal control over financial reporting. It should also enable user auditors to assess the risk of material misstatements in the entity's financial statements. The SOC 1 system description does not necessarily need to cover every aspect of the service organization system. Some aspects may not be relevant to the user entity's internal control over financial reporting. The AICPA is not as prescriptive in defining components of a SOC 1 system description. However, AICPA publication ATC 320 provides an outline of what an auditor should look for when reviewing a SOC 1 system description. The following list is based on that documentation. The first group here are those that are similar to the things required for a SOC 2 system description. And as with the SOC 2 system description, it should be at a sufficient level of detail to provide a good understanding of internal controls without giving too much information so that security may be compromised, and it should be presented in a manner that does not omit or distort any information. It should list the types of services provided to a broad range of customers or clients, including as appropriate the classes of transactions processed. The control objectives and controls should be included. This is similar to the SOC 2 Trust Services Criteria section and may be a lengthy section if the controls are not covered elsewhere in the description. Again, it is important to make sure that all controls are described and that it does not describe any control that is not in the control matrix and tested by the service auditor. It should include a listing of any relevant changes during the period, and subservice organization controls should also be documented. And if the inclusive method is used, it should identify separately controls at the service organization and controls at the subservice organization, and identify monitoring in place for controls at the subservice organization. If the carve-out method is used, the functions performed by the subservice organization and activities for monitoring the effectiveness of the subservice organization controls are to be listed. Complementary user entity controls should be documented if there are any, along with the applicable control objectives. Here are the other components in a SOC 1 system description. It should include procedures, both automated and manual, by which transactions are processed, and it should define the information used and the performance of procedures. It should also document how the system captures and addresses significant events and conditions other than transactions. The process used for report preparation should be included, and other aspects of the control environment, risk assessment process, information and communication, control activities, and monitoring activities should be included. So we have defined the system description as well as the responsibility for creating and maintaining it. We've also stated that the AICPA is the authority for what goes into the system description for both SOC 1 and SOC 2 reports. And we have defined the elements that are to be included in a SOC 1 and SOC 2 system description and described some similarities and differences. This concludes this webinar on SOC system descriptions. We would love to help your organization with SOC reporting, so please feel free to reach out to me or our SOC practice leader, Drew Hendrickson, with any questions you may have. You can also visit us on the web at lbmcsecurity.com.